The saloon stank of wet wool and desperation. Mara Holt stood against the back wall, arms crossed tight over her chest, watching the room fill with men who'd come to see her father's last shred of dignity get auctioned off. The fire in the stone hearth did nothing to cut the cold. January in the Montana Territory didn't forgive, and neither did debt. Her father, Thomas Holt, sat slumped at a corner table, 3 empty whiskey glasses lined up in front of him like grave markers. His hands shook, not from the cold, from knowing what he was about to do. "This is insane," Mara's sister Lily whispered beside her. "He can't actually—" "He can," Mara said flatly. "And he will." Lily was 19, blonde, delicate-featured in a way that made men stupid. Mara was 23, broad-shouldered, with a face people called handsome when they were being kind and plain when they weren't. She'd stopped caring which years ago. The saloon door banged open. More men filed in, stamping snow off their boots, breath clouding in the frigid air. Mara recognized most of them, miners, ranch hands, drifters who'd heard the rumor and come to see if Thomas Holt had finally lost his mind. He had. "Gentlemen," the voice belonged to Clayton Pierce, the man Thomas owed money to. Pierce owned half the town's businesses and wanted the other half. He stood near the bar now, expensive coat immaculate despite the weather, silver pocket watch gleaming. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. Mr. Holt has found himself in a difficult position, and we've arranged a mutually beneficial solution." "You mean you're making him sell his daughters like livestock?" someone called from the back. Pierce's smile didn't waver. "I mean, Mr. Holt is offering his daughters in marriage to settle his considerable debts. Any man who takes a bride tonight will be doing this community a service, saving a fellow Christian from ruin." Mara's jaw clenched. Christian. Right. Pierce wouldn't know Christian if it bit him. "How much does he owe?" another voice asked. $800, Pierce said calmly. "A considerable sum, but split between 2 brides." He gestured toward Mara and Lily like they were furniture. "400 each seems reasonable." The room erupted in mutters. Mara felt Lily's hand find hers, squeezing hard. "I won't do it," Lily whispered. "I'll run—" "You'll freeze to death before you hit the tree line," Mara said quietly. "And Pa will still owe the money. Then what? Pierce takes the house. Ma's grave is on that land, Lily." Lily's eyes filled with tears. "So we just let them?" Mara didn't answer. What was there to say? The choice had been made the moment their father took Pierce's money for the land deal that went bust. The moment he drank away every dollar they had left. The moment he decided his daughters were currency. "Let's start with the younger Miss Holt," Pierce announced, motioning Lily forward. Lily didn't move. Mara gave her a small push. "Go! Get it over with!" Lily walked to the center of the room like she was walking to the gallows. In the firelight, her blonde hair looked like spun gold. Her blue dress, the nicest thing she owned, fit her like it had been made by someone who knew what they were doing. The room shifted. Men leaned forward. $400, Pierce said. "Who'll start the bidding?" "400, someone shouted immediately. $450. $500. The bids came fast. Voices overlapping, men practically climbing over each other. Lily stood frozen in the center of it all, face pale, hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. Mara watched from the wall, arms still crossed. This was the easy part. Lily would go to whoever bid highest, probably Jacob Tanner, the ranch foreman, who'd been sniffing around for months. He had money, steady work. He wasn't cruel. Lily could have done worse. $600, Tanner shouted, standing up from his table. The room quieted. 600 was serious money. 600 going once, Pierce said, clearly pleased. Twice. 650, another voice cut in. Heads turned. Marcus Drummond, one of the railroad surveyors, grinned from his seat near the fire. Young, cocky, too much money, and not enough sense. Tanner's face darkened. 700. 750, Drummond countered. This is disgusting, someone muttered near Mara. She turned her head slightly. It was Sarah Kellerman, the schoolteacher, standing near the door with her shawl pulled tight. Their eyes met for a second. Sarah looked away. Mara didn't blame her. What could anyone do? This was frontier justice. Money talked. Morality walked. $800, Tanner said firmly. The room went quiet. 800 was double Pierce's asking price. Drummond shook his head, waving a hand in concession. Sold, Pierce declared. Jacob Tanner, you've just bought yourself a bride. Lily's shoulders sagged. Tanner stood, walked over and offered her his arm like they were at a church social. She took it because what else could she do? He led her to a side table where Pierce's clerk was already preparing papers. Mara's chest felt tight. One down. Now then, Pierce said, turning toward her. Miss Mara Holt, $400. Who'll start? Silence. Mara had known it would be different for her, known it the way you know winter's coming, inevitable and cold. But standing there with 30 men staring at her like she was a broken plow they weren't sure was worth fixing still made something burn in her throat. 400 is the asking price, Pierce repeated. Surely someone— 300, a voice called. Laughter rippled through the room. Mara's face stayed blank, but her hands curled into fists. The price is 400, Pierce said, annoyed. For her? The speaker was Dale Hutchins, a trapper who smelled like he'd been living inside a dead bear. 300's generous. More laughter. Mara's father didn't look up from his table. She's strong, Pierce tried, clearly not thrilled about having to sell this particular piece of merchandise. Good worker, healthy. She's built like a mule and about as pretty, someone called out. The room roared. Mara felt heat crawl up her neck, but she kept her face stone. She'd been hearing variations of this her whole life. You learn to let it slide off. You learned, or you broke. $250, another voice offered. Final! Pierce hesitated. $250 wouldn't cover half the debt. He'd have to eat the rest or go after Thomas Holt some other way. The saloon door opened. Cold air rushed in, and with it, a man Mara had never seen before. He was tall, 6'3", maybe more, with shoulders that filled the doorway. His coat was heavy fur, dusted with snow. Dark hair hung past his collar, and a thick beard covered half his face. But it was the scars that caught attention. One ran from his left temple down to his jaw. Another crossed his right cheekbone. His eyes were pale gray, cold as January ice. The room went quiet in a different way. Not anticipation. Wariness. The man closed the door behind him, snow melting off his boots as he stood there, taking in the scene. His gaze moved across the room. The fire. The men. Pierce. Lily signing papers at the side table. And finally landed on Mara. He stared at her for a long moment. Then he walked forward. The crowd parted. Nobody wanted to be in his way. You're auctioning women, the man said. His voice was rough, like he didn't use it much. Pierce recovered his salesman's smile. Arranging marriages, friend. Perfectly legal. The younger sister just sold for $800, but this one, how much? It wasn't a question. Pierce blinked. I'm sorry? The man nodded toward Mara. Her, how much? The room held its breath. $400 is the asking price, Pierce said slowly. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He opened it, counted out bills, and slapped them on the nearest table. 800. Someone dropped a glass. It shattered on the floor, loud in the silence. Pierce stared at the money. That's double. Is it enough or not? Pierce's hand moved toward the bills like he couldn't quite believe they were real. Yes, it's enough. The man looked at Mara. You got a coat? She found her voice, though it came out rougher than she meant. No. He shrugged out of his own heavy fur coat and held it out to her. Put this on. Mara didn't move. Her brain was trying to catch up. This stranger, this scarred, silent mountain of a man, had just paid double for her when nobody else would bid asking price, when they'd laughed at her, when her own father wouldn't meet her eyes. Why? The word came out before she could stop it. The man's expression didn't change. Because you'll freeze without it. Put it on. Slowly, Mara pushed off the wall and walked toward him. The coat was still warm from his body when she took it. It smelled like pine smoke and leather. She put it on. It swallowed her. Papers, the man said to Pierce. Pierce snapped his fingers at his clerk, who scrambled to prepare a second set of documents. The whole room watched as the stranger signed his name, Caleb Voss, the signature read, and Mara did the same, her hand shaking slightly. Congratulations, Pierce said, clearly unsure what else to say. I hope you'll both be very... Caleb turned and walked toward the door. He paused, glanced back at Mara. You coming? She looked around the room one last time. At her father, still staring at his empty glasses. At Lily, sitting next to Jacob Tanner, tears streaming down her face. At the men who'd laughed. At the ones who'd stayed silent. Then she followed Caleb Voss out into the snow. Cheb. The cold hit like a fist. Mara pulled the fur coat tighter as Caleb led the way down the saloon steps and into the street. Snow fell in thick, lazy flakes, covering everything in fresh white. The town, barely worth calling a town, just a scattered collection of buildings clinging to the mountain pass, looked almost peaceful under the blanket. A horse waited at the hitching post. Big, dark, built for endurance, not speed. Caleb untied it and swung up into the saddle in one smooth motion. He looked down at Mara. You ride? Not well. He held out a hand. You'll learn. She hesitated for half a second, then took his hand. His grip was iron strong as he pulled her up behind him. The saddle wasn't made for two, and she had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from sliding off. Hold on, he said, and nudged the horse forward. They rode out of town without another word. Mara looked back once. The saloon's windows glowed warm against the dark. Inside, her father was probably ordering another drink with Pierce's money. Inside, Lily was starting a new life with a man she barely knew. And Mara? Mara was riding into the frozen dark with a scarred stranger who'd paid double her worth for reasons she couldn't begin to guess. The wind picked up. Snow stung her face. She pressed closer to Caleb's back, trying to steal whatever warmth she could. They rode for hours. The town disappeared behind them. The trees grew thicker, taller, until they were riding through a forest so dense the snow barely reached the ground. The only sounds were the horse's steady breathing and the creak of leather. Mara's hands went numb. Her face felt like ice. She lost track of time. Might have been 2 hours, might have been 4. The darkness under the trees was complete. Finally, Caleb pulled the horse to a stop. We're here, he said. Mara looked around, saw nothing but trees and snow and darkness. Then Caleb dismounted and she saw it. A cabin, set back in a clearing, built low and solid against the mountain slope. Smoke rose from the chimney. A lean-to stable stood off to one side. Caleb helped her down from the horse. Her legs almost gave out when her feet hit the ground, too cold, too stiff. He caught her elbow, steadied her. Inside, yeah, he said. I'll see to the horse. The cabin door wasn't locked. Mara pushed it open and stepped into warmth. The interior was one large room. A fire burned in a stone hearth along the far wall. A bed frame with a thick mattress stood in one corner. A rough-built table and 2 chairs in the center. Shelves lined the walls stocked with supplies, canned goods, dried meat, tools. Everything neat, organized, sparse but functional. Mara stood dripping melted snow onto the floorboards, still wrapped in Caleb's coat, and tried to make sense of what was happening. The door opened behind her. Caleb came in carrying saddlebags and a rifle. He set them down, closed the door, and barred it. Then he crossed to the fire and added more wood. Mara watched him, waited. He straightened, turned to face her. You hungry? Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. I don't understand. It's a simple question. No, I mean, she gestured around the cabin, at him, at everything. Why did you do that? Why did you pay for me? Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he shrugged off his snow-dusted jacket and hung it on a peg by the door. Seemed like the right thing to do. The right... Mara's hands clenched. You paid $800 for a woman you'd never met. That's not the right thing. That's insane. Maybe. So why? He moved to the shelves, pulled down a tin of something. Because I watched 30 men laugh at you. Watched your father sit there and let them. Watched you stand against that wall like you expected it. He set the tin on the table. Figured you deserved better. Mara's throat went tight. You don't know me. Don't need to. I know men like that. He opened the tin, dried venison, and started laying strips on a plate. Lived around them my whole life. They're cowards. Every one. And you're what, some kind of hero? His mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. No, just a man with money and a choice. I chose. You chose wrong, Mara said. The words came out bitter. You wasted $800 on damaged goods. Caleb set the plate down with more force than necessary. You're not damaged goods. That's what they said. I don't care what they said. His voice went hard. Those men don't know a damn thing worth knowing. You're standing here, aren't you? After everything? That's not damaged. That's strong. Mara stared at him. Something in her chest cracked. Eat, Caleb said, pushing the plate toward her. Then we'll talk about the rest. She didn't move. The rest of what? He leaned against the table, crossing his arms. How this works. What I expect. What you want. What I want doesn't matter. It does here. Why? You own me now. That's how it works. No. Caleb's voice went flat. That's not how this works. You're not property. You're a person who got dealt a bad hand. I'm giving you another option. That's all. Mara's hands shook. She shoved them in the coat pockets. What kind of option? Depends on what you want, he said. You want to stay? You can stay. You want to leave? I'll give you money and a horse come spring. You want to build something here? We'll build it. But you decide, not me. That's not... She shook her head. That's not how marriage works. It's how mine does. Mara looked around the cabin again. One bed, one room. A stranger who'd paid a fortune for her and was now offering her what? Freedom? Choice? It didn't make sense. Nothing made sense. I don't trust you, she said finally. Good, Caleb nodded. You shouldn't. You don't know me. But you will, eventually. And then you can decide if I'm worth trusting. He pushed off from the table, moved toward the bed, and started pulling blankets off the mattress. What are you doing? Mara asked. Making you a place to sleep. Where will you, Floor's fine. He dropped the blankets in a pile near the fire. Slept on worse. Mara watched him work, her mind spinning. You're giving me the bed. You're the one who's been on a horse for 4 hours in a blizzard. Take the bed. But, Mara. He stopped, looked at her. I'm not your enemy. I'm not your master. I'm just a man trying to do one decent thing in a world that doesn't have many. Let me. She wanted to argue, wanted to push back because nothing was free, nothing came without cost. She'd learned that the hard way. But she was so tired, so cold, and that bed looked like the softest thing she'd seen in years. Okay, she whispered. Caleb nodded. Good. Eat, then sleep. We'll figure out tomorrow when it comes. Mara sat at the table and picked up a strip of dried venison. It was tough, salty, better than anything she'd tasted in months. She ate slowly, watching Caleb arrange his blankets by the fire. When she finished, he was already lying down, one arm under his head, staring at the ceiling. Caleb, she said quietly. Yeah? Thank you. He didn't answer right away, then, Don't thank me yet. Winter's long. You might change your mind. Mara climbed into the bed, still wearing the fur coat. The mattress was real straw, the blankets thick wool. She pulled them up to her chin and stared at the ceiling beams. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, the fire crackled. And for the first time in as long as she could remember, Mara Holt felt something like safe. She woke to the smell of coffee. Gray dawn light filtered through the cabin's single window. The fire had burned down to embers. Caleb stood at the stove, pouring dark liquid into 2 tin cups. Mara sat up slowly. Her body ached. Muscles she'd forgotten she had were screaming from the horse ride. The fur coat had slipped off during the night. She was still fully dressed underneath. Morning, Caleb said without turning around. Morning. He brought a cup over and set it on the table. Coffee. There's cornbread in the pan if you want it. Mara took the cup. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but it was hot, and it was real. She drank half of it in 3 swallows. Caleb sat across from her with his own cup. In the daylight, she could see him better. The scars were worse than she'd thought. One cut through his eyebrow. Another disappeared into his beard. His hands were rough, scarred too. Working hands. How old are you? She asked. 32. You live here alone? For the last 5 years. Doing what? Trapping, hunting, trading pelts in town twice a year.
He sipped his coffee. It's not much, but it's mine. And now? Now there's two of us. He set his cup down. If you're staying, Mara wrapped both hands around her cup, feeling the warmth seep into her fingers. What would staying look like? Caleb thought about it. Work, mostly. Winter's the hardest time. We'll need firewood, food, supplies.
Come spring, we can plant, fix the cabin, maybe build a second room if you want privacy. You do that? If it makes you comfortable. Mara studied him. His face gave nothing away. Why are you being so nice to me? I'm not being nice. I'm being fair. Most men wouldn't know the difference. I'm not most men. I'm starting to figure that out. She took another drink. What do you expect from me, really? Caleb met her eyes. I expect you to pull your weight. This isn't easy country. I can't carry dead weight, and I won't coddle you. But I also won't hurt you, won't touch you without permission, won't make you do anything you don't want to do. That's the deal. And if I want to leave? Come spring, I'll give you $500 and a horse. You can go wherever you want. 500. Mara's eyes widened. That's more than you paid. Call it interest. She shook her head, stunned. This doesn't make sense. Doesn't have to make sense. It just has to work. He stood, draining the last of his coffee. I'm going to check the traps. You can come with me or stay here. Your choice. Mara stood too. I'll come. Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe. Get warm clothes. It's cold out there. It wasn't just cold. It was brutal. Mara followed Caleb through knee-deep snow, wearing layers he'd pulled from storage. A thick wool shirt, buckskin pants that didn't quite fit, boots lined with rabbit fur. The forest was silent except for their breathing and the crunch of snow underfoot. Caleb moved like he knew every tree, every turn. He checked traps methodically. 3 rabbits, 1 fox, nothing else. He reset each trap with practiced efficiency, never wasting motion. Watch, he said, kneeling by one. See how the trigger's set? Too sensitive and birds will spring it. Not sensitive enough and you'll miss everything but bears. Mara crouched next to him, watching his hands work. How long have you been doing this? Since I was 12. Your family taught you? His hand stilled for just a second. Then he finished setting the trap and stood. Something like that. They walked in silence after that. Mara didn't push. Whatever Caleb's story was, he'd tell her when he was ready. Or he wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't her business. Yet. They were heading back when Mara heard it, a low rumble, getting louder. Caleb! I hear it! His hand went to the rifle on his back. Get behind me! The rumble turned into hoofbeats. 4 riders came through the trees, moving fast. They pulled up short when they saw Caleb, horses snorting clouds of steam. The lead rider was a big man, well-fed, wearing a coat that cost more than most people made in a year. His face was red from cold and anger. Voss, he said. Drummond. Caleb's voice stayed flat. Mara's stomach dropped. Drummond. Marcus Drummond, the railroad surveyor who'd bid on Lily. Heard you bought yourself a woman last night, Drummond said, eyes sliding to Mara. The ugly one. Caleb didn't move. What do you want, Marcus? Just wanted to see if the rumors were true. Wanted to see what kind of man pays double for goods nobody wanted. Drummond grinned. Guess I got my answer. You always did like broken things. One of the other riders laughed. Mara felt heat crawl up her neck, but she kept quiet. This wasn't her fight. You done? Caleb asked. Not quite. Drummond leaned forward in his saddle. See, my associates and I have been doing some surveying in this area. Railroads coming through. We'll need land. Your land, specifically. Not for sale. Didn't say I was buying. I'm telling you, railroads coming. You can sell now and make a profit, or you can wait till we take it for right-of-way. Either way, you're leaving. Caleb's grip on the rifle tightened. I'm not leaving. Then you're stupider than I thought. Drummond straightened. I'll be back with papers. You'll sign them, or you'll regret it. He wheeled his horse around. The others followed, snow spraying. When they were gone, Mara let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Railroad, she said. That's bad. Yeah. What are you going to do? Caleb started walking again. Not sure yet, but I'm not leaving. This land's mine. Mara caught up to him. Drummond seems like the type who gets what he wants. So am I. They made it back to the cabin as the sun was hitting its peak, which in January meant gray light instead of pitch dark. Caleb hung the rabbits and fox to skin later, then disappeared into the lean-to to check on the horse. Mara stood in the cabin, watching the fire, thinking. Last night she'd been auctioned like livestock. This morning she was standing in a stranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere, with a railroad company threatening to take the only stable thing in her new life. Nothing was ever easy. The door opened. Caleb came in, brushing snow off his shoulders. I want to help, Mara said. He looked at her. Help how? However I can. You said I needed to pull my weight. So let me. Teach me to trap. To hunt. Whatever you need. You ever shot a rifle? No. Skinned an animal? No. Worked a trap line in winter? No. She crossed her arms. But I can learn. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right. We start tomorrow. Hope you don't mind blood. I don't mind anything that keeps me useful. Something like respect flickered across his face. Fair enough. Well, the days blurred together. Caleb taught her everything. How to set traps, how to read tracks, how to skin a rabbit without ruining the pelt. He taught her to shoot, standing behind her to adjust her stance, his hands impersonal and steady. He taught her which plants were safe to eat, which would kill you, which would just make you wish you were dead. Mara learned fast. She had to. Winter didn't give second chances. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her muscles screamed, then strengthened. She fell in snowdrifts and got back up. She missed shots and tried again. She ruined pelts and learned from it. Caleb never went easy on her, never coddled, but he never mocked her either, never made her feel small for not knowing things. He just taught her, patiently, relentlessly. You're getting better, he said one afternoon as Mara successfully reset a trap without help. I'm getting less terrible, she corrected. Same thing. At night, they ate whatever they'd caught that day. Caleb cooked, surprisingly well for a man who lived alone. They sat at the table, eating in comfortable silence. Then Caleb would take the floor, and Mara would take the bed. Every night, she expected something to change, expected him to make a demand, to claim the rights he'd technically bought. He never did. 2 weeks passed, then 3. The cabin felt less like a prison and more like something else, something Mara didn't have a name for yet. Why don't you ever ask? She said one night. Caleb looked up from the knife he was sharpening. Ask what? For, she gestured vaguely, you know, what husbands expect. He went back to the knife. Because I'm not that kind of husband. What kind are you? The kind who keeps his word. He tested the blade's edge. I said I wouldn't touch you without permission. I meant it. What if I gave permission? The knife stilled. Caleb's eyes met hers. Are you? Mara's heart hammered. Was she? She didn't know. She just knew that this man had been kinder to her in 3 weeks than anyone had been in 3 years, had treated her like a person, like someone worth teaching, worth protecting. I don't know, she admitted. Then the answer's no. He went back to sharpening. When you know, tell me. Until then, nothing changes. Mara pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. You're a strange man, Caleb Voss. Been told that before. Why did you really buy me? The truth. He was quiet for a long time, then, I told you, because you deserved better. There has to be more to it than that. Caleb set the knife down, stared at the fire. I had a sister once. She got married to a man who seemed decent. Wasn't. By the time I realized it was too late. She died 3 years into that marriage. He claimed it was fever, but he trailed off. I wasn't there to help her. So when I saw you standing against that wall, I thought, maybe I could help you instead. Mara's chest tightened. I'm not your sister. I know. But maybe if I do right by you, it'll balance the scales. Maybe it won't. Either way, you're here and you're safe. That's what matters. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They sat in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, something fragile and new took root, Spring came slow and mean. The snow didn't melt so much as surrender inch by grudging inch, leaving behind mud that sucked at boots and turned every path into a battle. Mara stood outside the cabin one morning in early March, watching water drip from the eaves, and felt something shift in her chest. She'd survived. 4 months in the wilderness with a stranger, and she was still standing, more than standing. She was stronger than she'd ever been. "Ice is breaking on the creek," Caleb said from behind her. He came out carrying an axe, headed toward the woodpile. "Water will be running fast soon. Good for fishing." Mara turned to watch him work. He'd been quieter than usual the past few days, and she knew why. Spring meant choices. Spring meant she could leave if she wanted, take that money he'd promised, and ride out of his life forever. She hadn't told him she was staying yet, wasn't sure why she was waiting, maybe because saying it out loud made it real, made this arrangement permanent in a way that scared her more than the winter had. "Caleb," she started. He paused mid-swing. "Yeah?" "I've been thinking." Hoofbeats. They both turned. 3 riders came up the muddy trail, horses picking their way carefully through the slush. Mara recognized the one in front immediately, Marcus Drummond, looking even more pleased with himself than usual. Caleb set the axe down and moved to stand between Drummond and Mara. Not obvious about it, but definite. "Boss, some." Drummond called out cheerfully, "Lovely morning, isn't it? Spring in the mountains. Beautiful." "What do you want, Marcus?" "Just bringing you some paperwork." Drummond dismounted, pulled a rolled document from his saddlebag. "Railroad company's made its final offer. Very generous, considering. Twice what this land's worth, if we're being honest." "I told you not selling."
Yes, well. Drummond's smile went sharp. "That's the thing about progress, Voss. It doesn't really care what you want. The territory granted right-of-way last week. We can take this land whether you sell or not. I'm just trying to be neighborly and put some money in your pocket first." Caleb's jaw tightened. Right-of-way doesn't mean you can just steal property. Steal is such an ugly word. The legal term is eminent domain, and the beautiful part? There's nothing you can do about it. "Whoa." Drummond tossed the papers at Caleb's feet. "You've got 2 weeks to vacate. After that, we're coming through with surveyors and equipment. You can be here or not. Your choice." One of the other riders laughed. Mara felt her hands curl into fists. "You can't do this," she said. Drummond's attention shifted to her, and his expression turned ugly. "The ugly bride speaks. Didn't realize you came with opinions, sweetheart."
"Voss, you should have negotiated a better deal if you wanted one that kept quiet." Caleb moved so fast Mara barely saw it. 1 second he was standing still, the next his hand was fisted in Drummond's expensive coat, yanking him close. "Talk to her like that again," Caleb said quietly, "and I'll break every bone in your face." Drummond's eyes went wide. The other 2 riders reached for their weapons, but Drummond held up a hand. "Easy, no need for violence. I was just leaving." Caleb shoved him back. Drummond stumbled, caught himself. 2 weeks, Drummond said, brushing off his coat. "Then this land belongs to the railroad. And Voss? Next time you put your hands on me, I'll have the marshal arrest you for assault." He remounted and the 3 riders left, horses churning mud. Mara waited until they were out of sight. "Can they really do that? Just take your land?" "If the territory granted right-of-way, yeah." Caleb picked up the papers, unrolled them. His face went hard as he read. "They can do whatever they want. Law's on their side." "That's not fair." "Fair's got nothing to do with it. Never has." He crumpled the papers and threw them aside. "Railroad wants this pass. I'm in the way. That's all there is to it." Mara watched him walk back to the woodpile and swing the axe with more force than necessary. Wood split and flew. She stood there thinking. 2 weeks. That's all they had before everything Caleb had built got ripped away. Before the only place that had felt safe to Mara in years disappeared under railroad ties and progress. She wasn't going to let that happen. The problem was, she had no idea how to stop it. That night, Mara lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Caleb's breathing evened out near the fire. Her mind kept circling the same thoughts. Right of way, eminent domain. Legal terms that meant powerful people could take what they wanted and call it progress. But there had to be something. Some angle Drummond hadn't covered. She thought about the auction, about Pierce and his paperwork, about the way men like that operated, always looking for loopholes, always finding ways to make the law work for them instead of against them. Maybe she could do the same. The next morning, Mara found Caleb at the stable. "I need to go into town." He looked up from brushing the horse. "Why?" "To see the land office. Check the deed on this property." "What for?" "Because maybe there's something in the original filing that matters. Maybe there's a way to challenge their claim." Caleb set the brush down. "Mara, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but nothing. You said I needed to pull my weight. This is me pulling, unless you'd rather just give up." His eyes narrowed. "You know I won't." "Then let me try." She crossed her arms. "What's the worst that happens? I waste a day looking at old papers?" He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we'll go tomorrow." "You don't have to come." "Yes, I do." "You think I'm letting you ride into town alone after what Drummond said?" Mara felt warmth spread through her chest. "I can handle myself." "I know you can, but you don't have to." They rode out at dawn, the horse picking its way down the muddy mountain trail. Mara sat behind Caleb, arms around his waist, and tried not to think about how natural it felt. How right. Town looked different in spring. The snow was mostly gone, revealing the bones of the place. Weathered buildings, rutted streets, everything worn down by wind and time. The saloon where she'd been auctioned stood quiet in the morning light, windows dark. Mara looked away. The land office was a small building near the general store, run by a tired-looking man named Chester, who clearly wasn't thrilled about visitors. "Need to see the deed for the Voss property," Caleb said. "Up on the North Pass." Chester squinted at him. "What for?" "That's my business. A lot of people asking about property up there lately." Chester shuffled through a filing cabinet. "Railroad company's been in here twice, lawyers too. Just show me the deed." Chester pulled out a folder, slapped it on the counter. $5 filing fee. Caleb paid. Mara leaned over the counter, reading the yellowed document carefully. It was standard territorial grant language, land given to Caleb Voss in exchange for improvements and occupation. The boundaries were clearly marked, but there was something else. A notation at the bottom, almost lost in the cramped handwriting. "What's this?" She pointed. Chester looked. "Oh, that. Mineral rights clause. Original grant reserves mineral rights to the territory. Means if someone finds gold or silver on the land, territory gets a cut. But the surface rights belong to Caleb." "Sure, long as he maintains occupation and improvements." Chester shrugged. "Pretty standard." Mara's mind raced. "What about right-of-way grants? What about them? Can they override surface rights?" "Depends on the grant. Why?" "Just curious." She smiled at Chester. "Thank you for your help." Outside, Caleb looked at her. "You find something?" "Maybe. I need to see the railroad's right-of-way papers." "Those'll be at the territorial office. 2 days ride east." Mara chewed her lip. 2 days there, 2 days back. That left them almost no time before the 2-week deadline. But if there was a chance... "Let's go," she said. Caleb shook his head. "That's 4 days on the trail. We don't have supplies for that kind of trip." "Then we buy supplies." Caleb, listen to me." She grabbed his arm. "I know this is a long shot. I know it might not matter. But if there's even a chance we can stop this, don't you want to try?" He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something shifted in his expression. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do." They spent the rest of the day gathering supplies, dried meat, hardtack, coffee, ammunition. By sunset, they were ready to leave at first light. Mara lay awake that night, listening to the wind. Tomorrow they'd leave the cabin, leave the safety of the mountains, and ride into territory she'd never seen, all on a hunch, all on hope. "You awake?" Caleb's voice came soft from near the fire. "Yeah." "You don't have to do this. I can go alone." "I know." "So why are you?" Mara stared at the ceiling beams. Why was she? Because it was the right thing to do? Because Caleb had saved her and now she wanted to save him back? Or because somewhere over the past 4 months, this cabin had become home and this scarred, quiet man had become someone she couldn't imagine leaving? "Because it matters," she said finally. This place. What you built. It matters. Silence. Then, thank you. Don't thank me yet. I might be wrong about all of this. Even if you are, you tried. That's more than most people would do. Mara closed her eyes and let his words settle over her like a blanket. They left at dawn, riding east through country that got flatter and more open with every mile. The mountains fell away behind them, replaced by rolling grassland still brown from winter. They passed homesteads, small ranches, a trading post where they watered the horse and kept moving. Caleb rode tense, rifle across his lap. Don't like being exposed like this. How long since you've been this far from the cabin? 3 years? Mara looked at him. Why'd you go before? Supplies I couldn't get in town. Some business that needed handling. He didn't elaborate. They made camp that night under a sky so big and clear it made Mara dizzy. She'd grown used to the mountains, where trees blocked the view and the world felt contained. Out here, the stars went on forever. Caleb built a small fire and they ate in silence, watching the flames. You miss it? Mara asked. Being around people? No. Not at all? He poked at the fire with a stick. People are exhausting. They want things, expect things. Easier to be alone. But you're not alone anymore. No. He glanced at her. I'm not. Does it bother you, having me there? Caleb was quiet for a long time. At first, yeah. I'd gotten used to the silence, used to doing things my way. Then you showed up, and suddenly there was someone else to consider. Someone else's needs, opinions, presence. He set the stick down. But somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing the inconvenience and started noticing the company. So no, it doesn't bother me anymore. Mara's throat went tight. I'm glad I stayed. So am I. They held each other's gaze across the fire until Mara had to look away, heat climbing her neck that had nothing to do with the flames. The territorial office sat in a town big enough to have actual streets, 3 of them, anyway. Buildings lined up in neat rows. A hotel. A bank. Even a church with a white steeple. Progress, Mara thought. This is what they wanted to bring to the mountains. The office was run by a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Hartley, who looked like she didn't tolerate nonsense. Need to see right-of-way grants issued in the past 6 months, Caleb said. Mrs. Hartley raised an eyebrow. All of them? Just the ones for railroad development, North Pass area. That'll be the Mountain Pacific Line. One moment. She disappeared into a back room and emerged with a thick folder. These are public record, but you can't take them out of the building. You can read them here. Mara spread the papers across a table and started reading. Most of it was dense legal language, but she forced herself to go slow, to understand every clause. There. 3rd page. The right-of-way grant gave the railroad company access to build tracks through territorial land, but it specifically noted that existing private property owners had to be compensated at fair market value and given 60 days' notice before construction began. Caleb, look at this. He leaned over her shoulder, following her finger. They gave us 2 weeks, Mara said. The law says they have to give us 60 days. That's assuming they follow the law. They have to, Mrs. Hartley? Mara called out. Is there any way to challenge a right-of-way implementation if they're not following the grant terms? Mrs. Hartley came over, adjusted her spectacles, and read the relevant section. Well, if they're violating the notice requirement, you could file a complaint with the territorial court. Judge Morrison handles land disputes. How long does that take? Depends on the case. Could be weeks, could be months. And in the meantime, they can't legally force you off your property. Mrs. Hartley looked at them over her spectacles. Of course, legal and what actually happens aren't always the same thing. You'll need a lawyer if you want to fight this properly. Where do we find one? Jacob Brennan's the only one in 3 counties worth a damn. Office is 2 streets over, above the barber shop. They found Jacob Brennan exactly where Mrs. Hartley said he'd be. A small office that smelled like tobacco and old books. Brennan himself was younger than Mara expected, maybe 30, with ink-stained fingers and the look of someone who lived on coffee and spite. Voss and Holt, he said after Caleb explained the situation. Let me guess,
Railroad offered you money, you said no, now they're threatening to take it anyway.
That's about right, Caleb said. Classic. They've been pulling this all over the territory. Problem is, most people can't afford to fight back. Can you help us? Brennan leaned back in his chair. Maybe. Depends on what you can pay. This kind of case takes time, research, court appearances. I'm not cheap. How much? 200 up front. Another 3 if we go to trial. Caleb's jaw tightened. That was most of his savings, money he'd need if they lost the cabin, if they had to start over somewhere else. Mara watched him wrestle with it, then made a decision. We'll pay, she said. Whatever it takes. Caleb looked at her. Mara, we'll pay, she repeated firmly. This is our home. We fight for it. Something flickered across Caleb's face. Our home. She'd said it without thinking, but hearing it out loud made it true. All right, he said to Brennan. We'll pay. What do we need to do? Brennan pulled out paper and started writing. First, I file an injunction blocking the railroad from entering your property until the court rules on the notice violation. That'll buy us time. Then we build a case proving they violated the grant terms. With the right evidence and testimony, we can force them to follow the law, give you proper notice and fair compensation. And if we lose, then you lose the land, but at least you'll have tried. Brennan looked up. Fair warning, the railroad has deep pockets and expensive lawyers. This won't be easy. Nothing worth doing is, Mara said. Brennan smiled. I like you. All right, give me 3 days to file the paperwork and do some preliminary research. Where are you staying? Hotel down the street, Caleb said, though they hadn't actually checked in yet. Come back in 3 days. I'll have an update. They left Brennan's office and walked toward the hotel. The sun was setting, painting the street gold and orange. Mara felt exhausted, but strangely hopeful. We're really doing this, she said. Looks like it. Are you scared? Caleb thought about it. Yeah, but I'm more scared of giving up without trying. They got a room, one room, because it was cheaper and because neither of them questioned it anymore. The bed was narrow, but clean. Caleb took the floor out of habit until Mara said, That's stupid. The bed's big enough for both of us. He hesitated. I trust you, she added quietly. Those 3 words changed something. Caleb nodded and they lay down on opposite sides of the mattress, careful not to touch. Mara stared at the ceiling, hyper-aware of his breathing, his warmth, the small space between them. Caleb? Yeah? What happens if we lose? We start over, somewhere else. We? Silence. Then, if you want, I know Spring's here. I know you could take that money and leave. I wouldn't blame you. Mara rolled onto her side to face him. In the dim light from the window, she could just make out his profile. I don't want the money, she said. I want to stay. With you. If that's all right. Caleb turned his head to look at her. You sure? I've never been more sure of anything. He reached out slowly, gave her time to pull away. When she didn't, his hand found hers in the darkness between them. His fingers were rough, warm, solid. Then we fight, he said. Together. Together, Mara agreed. They fell asleep like that, hands linked, and for the first time in her life, Mara felt like she belonged somewhere. 3 days later, Brennan called them back to his office with news. Filed the injunction. Judge Morrison agreed to hear the case. Court date set for 6 weeks from now. 6 weeks? Caleb frowned. That's past the 2-week deadline. Exactly. Which means the railroad can't legally touch your property until this is resolved. I've also sent notice to their lawyers. If they try anything before the court date, they'll be in contempt. Mara felt relief wash through her. So we're safe? For now? For now, Brennan cautioned. But Voss, you need to understand, these people don't always play by the rules. Just because the law says they can't force you out doesn't mean they won't try other methods. Like what? Intimidation, sabotage, making your life difficult enough that you leave voluntarily. Brennan tapped his pen on the desk. Watch your back, both of you. They rode home slower than they'd left, stopping to rest the horse, to gather what supplies they could. The mountains appeared on the horizon like old friends, and Mara felt something in her chest loosen. Almost home. They reached the cabin 2 hours before sunset. Everything looked exactly as they'd left it. Smoke damage from the chimney, wood stacked neatly, the lean-to stable standing solid. Except for the smell. Caleb noticed it first. He pulled the horse to a stop, hand going to his rifle. "Stay here." "What is it?" "Blood." He dismounted, moved toward the cabin slowly. Mara ignored his order and followed, heart hammering. The door hung open. Inside, the place had been ransacked, table overturned, supplies scattered, blankets torn, and in the center of the floor, gutted and left to rot, was a deer carcass. "Message," Caleb said flatly. He nudged the carcass with his boot. 3, maybe 4 days old. Mara felt sick. "Who would—" "Drummond, or someone he hired." Caleb's voice was cold. "Wants us to know he can get to us whenever he wants." They spent the next hour cleaning, dragging the carcass outside, scrubbing blood from the floorboards, putting the cabin back together. Neither of them spoke. What was there to say? Brennan had warned them. Now they knew he was right. That night, Caleb barred the door and kept the rifle close. Mara lay in bed, trying not to jump at every sound. "You should have let me sleep on the floor," Caleb said from beside her. "I can watch better from there. You can watch fine from here." "Mara, I'm not sleeping alone tonight." Her voice came out sharper than she meant. "I'm scared, all right? I'm scared, and I don't want to be alone. So just stay." She felt him shift. Then his arm came around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. She fit there like she was made for it. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you," he said quietly. "I know. I mean it. Whatever comes, whoever tries, they'll have to go through me first." Mara pressed closer, breathing in the smell of leather and pine smoke that meant safety. "Same goes for you. We protect each other." "Deal." They stayed like that until Mara's breathing evened out and sleep finally came. The next morning brought visitors, but not the kind Mara expected. She was hanging laundry when she heard horses. Caleb came out of the lean-to, rifle ready, but relaxed when he saw who it was. An older woman rode at the front, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, with 2 younger women flanking her. They pulled up in front of the cabin, and the older woman dismounted with practiced ease. "Caleb Voss," she said. "Been a long time." "Mrs. Chen." Caleb lowered the rifle. "What brings you up here?" "Heard you were having trouble with the railroad. Thought you might want to know you're not alone." The younger women dismounted. One was barely 20, dark-haired and fierce-looking. The other was older, maybe 30, with tired eyes and a set jaw. "This is my daughter Lynn," Mrs. Chen said, indicating the younger one. "And Sarah Kellerman. She teaches school in town." Mara recognized Sarah. She'd been at the auction. Their eyes met and Sarah gave a small nod. "Railroad's been pushing all through the valley," Mrs. Chen continued. "Taking land, burning out homesteaders who won't sell. Most people are too scared to fight back. But I'm not. And I heard you filed an injunction." Caleb glanced at Mara, then back to Mrs. Chen. "News travels fast." "Small territory. Word gets around." Mrs. Chen crossed her arms. "Here's what I'm proposing. We band together. Share information, watch each other's properties, present a united front. Railroad can push around 1 homesteader. It's harder to push around 10. "How many people are you talking about?" "Right now, 6 families willing to fight. 7 if you're in." Mara stepped forward. "We're in." Mrs. Chen's eyes shifted to her. "You must be the wife. Heard about you too. Heard you're the one who found the legal angle." "I just read the papers." "Don't sell yourself short. Most people don't bother reading. They just roll over." Mrs. Chen extended her hand. "Eleanor Chen, my husband and I have been working this valley for 20 years. Nobody's taking it without a fight." Mara shook her hand. Eleanor's grip was iron. They spent the next hour talking strategy. Eleanor had organized patrols, information sharing, even arranged for a couple of families to temporarily relocate to each other's properties for safety in numbers. "What about your lawyer?" Lynn asked. "Can he represent all of us?" "I can ask," Caleb said, "but it'll cost more." "We'll pool resources," Eleanor said. "Everyone contributes what they can. This affects all of us." Sarah spoke up for the first time, her voice quiet but firm. "I can contribute." And I can help spread word in town. Make sure people know what the railroad's really doing. They talked until the sun was high, making plans, sharing information about railroad movements, comparing notes on threats and intimidation. When Eleanor and the others finally left, Mara felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Real hope. Not just for survival, but for winning. That was unexpected, Caleb said, watching them ride away. Good unexpected? Yeah, I think so. He looked at her. You did that. You found the legal angle. Now people have something to rally around. Mara shook her head. You gave me a reason to look. This place. What we're building. She paused. What we're building together. Caleb's hand found hers. Together, he echoed. And standing there in the spring sunlight, mud everywhere and danger still looming, Mara knew she'd found something worth fighting for. Not just land. Not just shelter. Home. The court date arrived with the kind of heat that made everything shimmer. 6 weeks had crawled by in a blur of preparation, meetings with Brennan, and sleepless nights wondering if any of it would matter. Mara stood outside the territorial courthouse in her one decent dress, the same blue one she'd worn to the auction, and tried to keep her hands from shaking. You ready? Caleb asked beside her. He'd cleaned up, trimmed his beard, put on a shirt that didn't have holes in it. He looked uncomfortable as hell. No, Mara said honestly. You? Not even close. They walked up the courthouse steps together. Inside, the building was already packed. Settlers from the valley, railroad men in expensive suits, lawyers shuffling papers. Eleanor Chen caught Mara's eye from across the room and gave a firm nod. Lynn stood beside her mother, arms crossed, looking ready for war. Sarah Kellerman sat near the back, notepad in hand. And there, front and center with 3 lawyers flanking him, sat Marcus Drummond. He saw Mara looking and smiled like he'd already won. All rise for Judge Morrison. The courtroom stood as one. Judge Morrison entered, a gray-haired man who looked like he'd spent 50 years seeing the worst humanity had to offer and hadn't been impressed yet. He took his seat, banged the gavel, and surveyed the packed room with obvious displeasure. Mountain Pacific Railway Company versus Caleb Voss and Associated Homesteaders, he announced. This better not be a waste of my time. Mr. Brennan, you filed the injunction. Make your case. Brennan stood and Mara was struck again by how young he looked. Too young to be going up against the railroad's legal team. But when he spoke, his voice carried weight. Your Honor, the Mountain Pacific Railway is attempting to seize private property in violation of their own right-of-way grant. The territorial agreement clearly states property owners must receive 60 days' notice and fair market compensation. My clients received 2 weeks' notice and an offer well below market value. The railroad is in breach of contract. One of the railroad's lawyers stood immediately. Your Honor, Robert Ashford for Mountain Pacific. The notice period is a guideline, not a mandate. The territory granted us right-of-way to facilitate progress. These homesteaders are impeding that progress with frivolous legal challenges. Frivolous? Brennan's voice went sharp. Your client is violating the terms of their own agreement. That's not frivolous, that's fraud. Well, that's defamation, Ashford shot back. And I'll remind counsel to watch his language. Judge Morrison banged his gavel. Both of you, sit down and shut up. I'll decide what's frivolous and what's fraud. He looked at Brennan. You have evidence the railroad violated the notice requirement? Yes, Your Honor. I have the original right-of-way grant, which clearly specifies 60 days. I have testimony from multiple property owners who received less than 30 days' notice. And I have documentation showing the railroad's initial offers were 20 to 40% below assessed property values. Your Honor, Ashford interrupted, property assessments are subjective. What the railroad offered was more than fair considering the remote location and limited improvements on most of these parcels. Eleanor Chen stood up from the gallery. Limited improvements? I've been working my land for 20 years. The gavel came down hard. Ma'am, sit down or I'll have you removed. This is a court of law, not a town meeting. Eleanor sat, but her glare could have melted steel. Judge Morrison rubbed his temples like he felt a headache coming. Mr. Brennan, call your first witness. I call Caleb Voss. Caleb stood and made his way to the witness stand. Mara watched him go, her heart in her throat. He'd never been comfortable with attention, with people. Now he had a courtroom full of eyes on him. Brennan approached the stand. Mr. Voss, how long have you owned your property? 5 years. And in that time, what improvements have you made? Caleb's jaw tightened. Built the cabin, lean-to stable, cleared 3 acres for planting, installed a root cellar, dug a well. That sounds like substantial investment. When did you first learn the railroad wanted your land? January. Marcus Drummond came to my cabin with an offer. What was that offer? $400. A murmur went through the courtroom. Brennan let it settle before continuing. And what's the assessed value of your property? $1,200, plus improvements. So they offered you roughly a third of what your land is worth? Objection, Ashford called, leading the witness. Sustained, Morrison said. Rephrase. Brennan nodded. How did their offer compare to your property's value? It was an insult. Someone in the gallery laughed. Morrison's gavel came down again. And when you refused their offer, Brennan continued, what happened? Caleb's eyes found Drummond. They said they'd take it anyway. 2 weeks to vacate or they'd come through with surveyors and equipment. Did they mention the 60-day notice requirement? No. Did they offer fair compensation? No. Brennan turned to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Ashford stood, buttoning his jacket. Mr. Voss, you say you've owned this property for 5 years. Were you aware when you purchased it that the territory was negotiating with railroad companies for right-of-way access? No. So you made an investment without proper research. That's not the railroad's fault, is it? I researched plenty. The deed was clean. No mention of railroad access. Because those negotiations were ongoing. Surely you understand that infrastructure development is essential for territorial growth? Caleb's hands gripped the railing. I understand that a man's home should mean something, that you can't just take what people built because it's convenient for you. But progress requires sacrifice, doesn't it? The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That's a nice way of saying you want to steal my land. The courtroom erupted. Morrison's gavel worked overtime. Mr. Voss, Ashford said smoothly, isn't it true that you live alone on that property? That until recently you had no wife, no family? Mara felt ice slide down her spine. I got married in January, Caleb said carefully. Yes, at a rather unusual auction, I believe. Tell me, did you purchase your wife for $800? Brennan shot to his feet. Objection. Relevance? I'm establishing that, Mr. Voss makes impulsive decisions without considering long-term consequences, Ashford said. Overruled, Morrison said. But get to the point, Counselor. Ashford smiled. Mr. Voss, you paid $800 for a bride you'd never met. Then 2 months later, you're fighting to keep land worth $1,200. Seems like you have a pattern of overvaluing things, doesn't it? Caleb's face went dark. My wife's worth more than all the land in this territory, and I didn't overvalue my property. You're trying to steal it. I'm trying to establish that you're an unreliable narrator of your own situation. Ashford turned to the judge. No further questions. Caleb stepped down, his whole body rigid with anger. Mara wanted to go to him, but Brennan was already calling the next witness. I call Mara Voss to the stand. Mara's heart stopped. They hadn't discussed this. Brennan had said he might call her, but she'd hoped. Mrs. Voss? Morrison prompted. She stood on shaking legs and made her way to the witness stand. The room felt too hot, too crowded. She could feel Drummond's eyes on her, Ashford's calculating stare. Mrs. Voss, Brennan began gently, you've been living on the Voss property since January? Yes. And in that time, have you observed your husband's investment in the land? Yes. He works every day, maintaining, improving, preparing for the future. A future he planned to build there? Yes. And now the railroad wants to take that future away? Objection, Ashford called. Argumentative. Sustained. Brennan switched tactics. Mrs. Voss, when did you first learn about the railroad's plans? March, when Marcus Drummond showed up with papers. And what was your reaction? Mara looked directly at Drummond. I thought it was wrong, that someone could just take what you'd built because they had more money and better lawyers. A few people in the gallery nodded. Morrison's expression stayed neutral. No further questions, Brennan said. Ashford approached the stand like a predator. Mrs. Voss, you mentioned you've lived on the property since January. That's only 5 months, correct? Yes. Not a very long time to develop such strong attachment to a place, is it? Long enough to know what matters. Or perhaps long enough to realize your husband's property is all you have. Ashford pulled a paper from his stack. According to records, you were sold at auction to settle your father's debts. You had nothing. No money, no prospects. Then Mr. Voss bought you, and suddenly you have a stake in defending his land. Mara's hands clenched. I defend it because it's right. Or because if your husband loses his property, you lose your security. Objection! Brennan was on his feet. Counsel is badgering the witness. I'm establishing motive, Ashford said calmly. This witness has a vested interest in the outcome of this case beyond the legal merits. We all have a vested interest, Mara said, her voice carrying across the courtroom. Everyone in this valley does. The railroad wants to run roughshod over people who've built lives here, and we're supposed to just accept it because they call it progress? Mrs. Voss? No. She leaned forward. You want to paint me as some desperate woman clinging to security? Fine. I am desperate. Desperate to keep the first home I've ever had that felt safe. Desperate to protect the man who gave me that when no one else would. And desperate to stop people like you from destroying what good people have built just because you can. The courtroom went dead silent. Ashford's smile slipped. No further questions. Mara stepped down, her legs barely holding her. She made it back to her seat beside Caleb, who reached over and squeezed her hand so hard it hurt. That was, he started. Stupid, she whispered. I lost my temper. No, that was perfect. Brennan called 3 more witnesses, Eleanor Chen, Sarah Kellerman, and a surveyor who testified that the property values the railroad offered were well below market. Each time, Ashford tried to discredit them, to paint them as obstacles to progress, but the damage was done. The courtroom had seen the human cost of the railroad's plans. Finally, Morrison called a recess. We'll reconvene in 1 hour for closing arguments. The crowd spilled outside. Mara stood on the courthouse steps trying to catch her breath. You did good in there, Eleanor said, appearing beside her. That speech? That's what people needed to hear. I just made us look emotional instead of logical. Emotion is what wins cases like this. Logic just gives the judge an excuse. Eleanor patted her arm. Trust me, I've been fighting battles longer than you've been alive. You gave them something to remember. The hour crawled by. Mara and Caleb found a quiet spot under a tree, away from the crowd. Whatever happens, Caleb said quietly, I want you to know, you changed everything. Before you, I was just surviving. Now I'm fighting. That's because of you. Mara looked at him, this scarred, difficult man who'd somehow become her whole world. I was drowning before you. You gave me a reason to swim. He pulled her close, and they stood there under the tree, holding on to each other like they could will the world to be fair. The courtroom reconvened. Morrison took his seat, looking grimmer than before. Closing arguments, he announced. Mr. Ashford, you're up. Ashford stood, smoothing his jacket. Your Honor, this case is simple. The territory granted Mountain Pacific right-of-way to build a railroad that will benefit thousands of people. A handful of homesteaders are trying to block that progress with technicalities about notice periods and property values. Yes, the notice was shortened. Yes, the offers could have been higher. But the alternative is delaying critical infrastructure for months, maybe years, at enormous cost. The greater good must take precedence. He sat down. Brennan stood. Your Honor, counsel for the railroad just admitted his clients violated the terms of their agreement. He calls it technicalities. I call it the law. The right-of-way grant isn't a suggestion. It's a binding contract with specific requirements. If we allow the railroad to ignore those requirements because it's convenient, what's to stop them from ignoring every other law that gets in their way? My clients aren't blocking progress. They're demanding that progress follow the rules. That's not too much to ask. Morrison leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. The courtroom held its breath. I've heard enough, he said finally. Here's my ruling. The railroad did violate the notice requirement. That's not in dispute. However, I'm not convinced that violation rises to the level of invalidating the entire right-of-way grant. Mara's heart sank. Therefore, Morrison continued, I'm ordering the following. 1. The railroad must provide proper 60-day notice to all affected property owners, starting from today. 2. All compensation offers must be at or above assessed property values, subject to independent verification. 3. Any property owner who wishes to contest their assessment may do so through the Territorial Land Office. And 4. The railroad will pay all court costs and legal fees for the plaintiffs. He banged the gavel. That's my ruling. This case is closed. The courtroom erupted. Mara sat frozen, trying to process what just happened. They'd won. Not completely, but enough. 60 days. Fair compensation. Time to prepare, to plan, to decide. Eleanor was hugging Lynn. Sarah was scribbling furiously in her notepad. The railroad's lawyers looked like they'd swallowed nails. And Drummond stood slowly, straightened his coat, and walked out without looking at anyone. Caleb turned to Mara. We did it. We did, she said. And then she was laughing and crying at the same time, and Caleb was pulling her into his arms, and nothing had ever felt so much like victory. Outside, the celebration was immediate. Eleanor organized an impromptu gathering at the saloon, the same saloon where Mara had been auctioned 6 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. Inside, the place was packed with homesteaders, all talking at once, buying rounds, planning next steps. Someone started playing a fiddle. Someone else started dancing. Mara stood at the bar with Caleb, nursing a whiskey she didn't really want. Strange being back here, she said. Caleb looked around the room. Yeah. Last time we were here, you were standing against that wall. And you were the scarred stranger who paid too much for damaged goods. You weren't damaged. You were perfect. Mara looked at him. I wasn't. I'm still not. I'm stubborn and angry, and I don't know when to keep my mouth shut. Good. I wouldn't want you any other way. Something in his voice made her pulse quicken. Caleb, Mara, I need to tell you something. He set his glass down, turned to face her fully. When I bought you that night, I told myself it was about doing the right thing, about giving you a choice. But somewhere along the way, it became about more than that. It became about you, about us. And I know this isn't the time or place, but I can't. I love you, Mara interrupted. Caleb stopped, stared at her. I love you, she repeated. I think I have for a while now. I just didn't know how to say it. He cupped her face in his hands, rough palms gentle against her skin. I love you too, more than I knew I could love anything. And then he kissed her, right there in the crowded saloon, and Mara felt everything else fall away. There was just this, his mouth on hers, his arms around her, the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. Someone whistled. Someone else cheered. They broke apart, both of them grinning like idiots. Get a room, Eleanor called from across the bar. Not a bad idea, Caleb murmured. They left the celebration early, rode back to the cabin under stars that seemed brighter than usual. The night air was cool, summer finally breaking into something softer. Inside the cabin, Caleb lit the fire while Mara changed out of her dress and into the comfortable clothes that had become her uniform. When she turned around, he was watching her. What? She asked. Just thinking about how different everything is now. 6 months ago, this place was just mine. Now it's ours. Does that scare you? Terrifies me. He crossed the room to her. But I wouldn't change it. Mara reached up, traced the scar that ran down his cheek. How'd you get this one? Bar fight, long time ago. And this one? She touched the one through his eyebrow. Mining accident. You're a collection of disasters, aren't you? Takes one to know one. She laughed, and then they were kissing again, slower this time. Caleb's hands tangled in her hair. Mara's fingers found the buttons of his shirt. You sure? He asked against her mouth. I've never been more sure of anything. They made it to the bed in stages, shedding clothes, learning each other's scars and stories written in skin. Caleb was gentle and careful until Mara told him she didn't need gentle, and then he wasn't. And when it was over, they lay tangled together, breathing hard, the fire burning low. Mara, Caleb said into the darkness. Yeah? Thank you for staying, for fighting, for being here. She pressed closer. Thank you for choosing me when no one else would. Best choice I ever made. They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Mara dreamed of a future that felt possible for the first time in her life. The next morning brought reality back with a vengeance. They were eating breakfast when they heard horses. Mara looked at Caleb, who was already reaching for the rifle. But it wasn't Drummond or railroad men. It was Sarah Kellerman, riding hard, her face pale. "What happened?" Caleb asked as she dismounted. Sarah handed him a newspaper, the Territorial Gazette. "You need to see this." The headline made Mara's blood run cold. Homesteaders win court battle, but at what cost? The article was written by someone named Jonathan Pierce, no relation to the Clayton Pierce who'd organized the auction, but just as venomous. It painted the court victory as a temporary setback for progress, implied the homesteaders were backwards and selfish, and worst of all, it dug into Caleb and Mara's personal lives. Local mountain man Caleb Voss, who purchased his wife at a dead auction, led the fight against the railroad, the article read. Sources close to the case suggest Mrs. Voss, born Mara Holt, daughter of disgraced gambler Thomas Holt, has significant financial motivation to protect her husband's assets. Questions remain about the legitimacy of their union and whether this legal challenge is truly about property rights or about a desperate woman clinging to her only security. Mara felt sick. "They're making me sound like a gold digger," Sarah finished quietly. "I know. It's all over town. People are talking." "Let them talk," Caleb said, his voice hard. "We won the case. That's what matters." "Is it?" Sarah looked between them. "Because the railroad's using this to turn public opinion against you. They're saying you're blocking progress out of greed, that you don't care about the greater good." "The greater good?" Mara's hand shook. "We're trying to keep our home." "I know that, but they're very good at making you look like the villains." Sarah pulled out another paper. "And it's working. Town council met yesterday. They passed a resolution supporting the railroad's expansion plans. 3 of the homesteaders who fought with you are selling now. They can't handle the pressure." Caleb and Mara exchanged a look. "What about Eleanor?" Mara asked. "Still fighting, but she's getting threats. Someone shot her dog last week." The coffee in Mara's stomach turned sour. This is how they win. Not through the courts, through fear. "Yeah," Sarah folded the papers. "I wanted to warn you. Whatever comes next, it won't be legal. They'll go after you personally, your reputation, your safety, whatever it takes." After Sarah left, Mara and Caleb sat at the table, the newspaper between them like evidence of a crime. "We could sell," Caleb said quietly. "Take the money. Start over somewhere else." Mara looked at him. "Is that what you want?" "I want you safe. I want us to have a life without looking over our shoulders." "We'll be looking over our shoulders wherever we go. These people don't stop. They'll find another fight, another victim." She pushed the paper away. "No, we stay. We fight. And we show them that we're not afraid." "Even if they destroy your reputation?" "My reputation was destroyed the day my father auctioned me off. I built it back. I can do it again." She reached across the table, took his hand. "We do this together. That's what you said, right?" "Together," Caleb agreed. But even as he said it, Mara could see the worry in his eyes. And she knew, deep down, that the hardest part was just beginning. The threats started small. A dead rabbit nailed to the cabin door. Traps sprung and emptied. Supplies stolen from the lean-to. Mara and Caleb documented everything, reported it to the marshal, who shrugged and said he couldn't do much without proof of who was responsible. "Probably just kids," the marshal said, not meeting their eyes. "Kids don't ride 50 miles into the mountains to pull pranks," Caleb said flatly. The marshal shifted his weight. "Look, Voss, I can't help you if you don't have evidence. File a complaint if something else happens." They filed 3 more complaints over the next 2 weeks. Nothing changed. Then the fires started. The first one was Eleanor Chen's barn. Mara and Caleb rode down when they saw the smoke, arriving to find Eleanor and Lynn trying to salvage what they could while the structure burned to the ground. 20 years of stored hay, tools, winter supplies, gone. "They waited until we were at market," Eleanor said, face streaked with soot. "Knew we wouldn't be here to stop it." "Did you see anyone, Sis?" Mara asked. "No, but I know who's responsible." Eleanor's eyes were hard. Same people who've been making offers on my land every week. Same people who told me selling would be easier than fighting. 2 days later, it was the Halstead place. Then the Montgomerys. Each time the fires came when the families were away. Each time, nothing could be proven. They're trying to scare us off one by one, Lynn said at the emergency meeting Eleanor called. The remaining homesteaders gathered in what was left of Eleanor's barn, faces grim in the lamplight. Pick us off until there's nobody left to fight. So what do we do? James Halstead asked. His hands were bandaged from trying to save his livestock. We can't guard our places every second. We take shifts, Caleb said. Rotate patrols. Someone's always watching. That's not sustainable, Sarah pointed out. We all have work to do. Crops to tend, animals to feed. Then we make it sustainable, Mara said. We pool resources, share labor, cover for each other. And when they escalate, Montgomery asked quietly, because they will. Fires are just the start. Next time it might be worse. The room fell silent. Everyone knew he was right. Eleanor stood, drawing all eyes. Then we give them something they don't expect. We stop hiding. We stop being victims. We take this fight public. How? Mara asked. There's a territorial assembly meeting in 3 weeks. Representatives from every county, newspapers from back east. The railroad wants to present their expansion plans, make it official. Eleanor's smile was sharp. We show up. We make them defend their actions in front of everyone. They'll just spin it, Sarah said. Make us look like we're blocking progress. Let them try. Eleanor looked around the room. But this time, we don't let them control the story. We bring evidence, photographs of the burned barns, testimony from families who've been threatened, documentation of every law they've broken. We make them answer for what they've done. Mara felt something kindle in her chest. That could work? Or it could make everything worse, Halstead said. Draw more attention, make us bigger targets. We're already targets, Caleb said. Might as well make it count. The vote was unanimous. 3 weeks to prepare, 3 weeks to gather evidence and testimony. 3 weeks to get ready for a fight that would determine everything. Mara threw herself into the work. She rode with Sarah to document the damage, photographing burned buildings, interviewing families, collecting sworn statements about threats and intimidation. Sarah's connections in town proved invaluable. She knew which newspaper editors might listen, which territorial officials had consciences that could still be pricked. You're good at this, Sarah said one afternoon as they reviewed their notes. Organizing people, building a case. You ever think about doing this professionally? Mara looked up from the stack of testimonies. Doing what? Advocacy. Legal work. There's a need for people who understand how the system works and aren't afraid to fight it. I don't have any training. Neither did most of the lawyers I know. They learned by doing. Sarah tapped the papers. You've got something they don't. You know what it's like to have nothing, to be dismissed and underestimated. That's worth more than any degree. Mara thought about that as they rode back to the cabin that evening. A year ago, she'd been standing in a saloon waiting to be auctioned off, believing she had no value beyond what someone would pay for her. Now she was building legal cases and organizing resistance. The change felt impossible and inevitable all at once. Caleb was waiting when she got home, chopping wood in the fading light. He'd been quieter lately, more withdrawn. Mara knew why. Every burned barn, every threat, every escalation drove home the same truth. They'd painted targets on their backs by fighting, and there was no taking it back now. How'd it go? He asked, setting down the axe. Good. We've got solid documentation now. 12 families willing to testify. She dismounted, tied the horse. Sarah thinks we have a real chance at the assembly. And after, when we've embarrassed the railroad in front of everyone. Caleb wiped sweat from his forehead. They won't just let that go. So what's the alternative? Roll over? Give up? I'm not saying give up. I'm saying we need to be ready for the consequences. Mara crossed her arms. I'm ready. Are you? He stepped closer. Because these people don't play fair, Mara. We've seen what they're willing to do. Burning barns is just the start. When we stand up at that assembly, when we call them out publicly, they're going to come after us with everything they have. I know. Do you? Because I can't... His voice cracked. I can't lose you. Not to this. Not to anything.
Mara's anger drained away. She reached up, cupped his face in her hands. "You won't lose me. We're in this together, remember? Whatever comes, we face it together." He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. They stood like that until the sun finished setting and the stars came out. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Mara was hanging laundry when she heard the wagon. She looked up to see a familiar vehicle making its way up the trail. Jacob Tanner's wagon, the same one he'd used to take Lily away after the auction. Mara's heart jumped into her throat. The wagon stopped in front of the cabin. Tanner climbed down first, then turned to help someone else. Lily. She looked different. Thinner, paler, but something else too, harder around the edges. She saw Mara and froze. "Lily?" Mara breathed. "Hi, Mara." They stood staring at each other across 20 feet of muddy ground, while everything Mara wanted to say tangled in her throat. Then Lily moved and Mara moved, and they met in the middle in a collision of arms and tears. "I'm sorry," Lily sobbed into Mara's shoulder. "I'm so sorry I left you there. I should have—" "Stop. You did what you had to do. We both did." They held on until Lily pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I heard about the court case, about everything. Jacob showed me the papers." Tanner shifted uncomfortably. "Seemed like you could use support. Lily's been worried." Caleb emerged from the cabin, rifle in hand, until he saw who it was. He nodded at Tanner, then at Lily. "Ma'am." "This is my husband, Caleb," Mara said. "Caleb, my sister Lily, and Jacob Tanner." "We've met," Tanner said, "at the auction." An awkward silence fell. Mara ushered everyone inside, put coffee on, tried to remember how to be hospitable when her mind was still reeling from seeing her sister for the first time in 8 months. "How have you been?" Mara asked, pouring coffee with hands that shook slightly. "All right, Jacob's been good to me." Lily glanced at her husband. "Better than I expected, honestly." Tanner had the grace to look embarrassed. "Seemed like the least I could do, given how we started." "And you?" Lily looked at Mara. "Are you happy?" Mara looked at Caleb, who was watching her with those steady gray eyes. "Yeah, I am." "Good. That's—" Lily's voice caught. "That's good. When I saw you leave with him that night, I was terrified. But reading about the court case, seeing you fight like this, I realized you'd found something worth fighting for." "We both did," Mara said quietly. They talked for hours. Lily shared stories of life on Tanner's ranch, the awkwardness of their first months, the slow building of something that resembled partnership, if not love. Tanner contributed occasionally, mostly letting Lily speak. "Pa died," Lily said eventually. 2 months ago. Drank himself to death in that boarding house Pierce set him up in." Mara felt nothing, not grief, not relief. Just a dull acknowledgement. "How'd you find out?" "Pierce sent word. Wanted to know if we'd pay for a burial. Jacob did. I didn't go." "Me neither," Mara said. "If they'd told me." Lily reached across the table, squeezed her hand. "We don't owe him anything. Not grief, not forgiveness. He made his choices." "Yeah, he did." Tanner cleared his throat. "We came for another reason, too. Wanted to let you know I'm testifying at the assembly about the railroad's tactics. They tried to buy my land last month, said if I didn't sell, they'd make it so my cattle couldn't get to market. When I refused, they poisoned my water supply." Caleb's head snapped up. "They what?" "Dumped something in the creek that feeds my land. Lost 15 head before I figured it out." Tanner's jaw was tight. "I filed complaints. Nothing happened. So when I heard you were organizing testimony, I figured it was time to stop being quiet." "That's dangerous," Mara said. "You know what they've been doing to people who stand up?" "I know, but I also know I can't live with myself if I let them get away with it." He looked at Lily. "We talked about it. We're willing to take the risk." Lily nodded. "Someone has to stand up. Might as well be us." After they left, Mara stood at the window watching the wagon disappear down the trail. "Didn't expect that," Caleb said beside her. "Me neither." Mara leaned against him. "She looks so different." "You both do, from that night in the saloon. Is that good or bad?" "Good. You both look like you found your footing." The assembly meeting was held in the territorial capital, a town 3 times the size of anything Mara had seen before,
with paved streets and buildings that rose 3 stories high. The homesteaders arrived in a caravan, 12 families strong, wagons loaded with evidence and determination. The assembly hall was packed. Railroad executives in expensive suits clustered on one side. Politicians and bureaucrats filled the center, and in the back, a handful of newspaper reporters with notebooks ready. Mara sat between Caleb and Eleanor, hands clenched in her lap, heart hammering. The railroad's presentation came first. Marcus Drummond stood at a podium, flanked by engineers with charts and maps, and painted a picture of progress and prosperity. The railroad would connect the territory to markets back east. It would bring jobs, commerce, civilization. The future demands sacrifice, Drummond said, his voice carrying to the back of the hall. A handful of homesteaders cannot be allowed to stand in the way of progress that will benefit thousands. We've offered fair compensation. We followed the law. Now we ask this assembly to support our vision and clear the remaining obstacles to development. Polite applause. Mara felt sick. Then it was their turn. Eleanor stood first. She walked to the podium like she owned the place, laid out photographs of burned barns, and spoke in a voice that didn't shake. This is progress? She held up a picture of a ruined barn. Burning families out of their homes? This is following the law? She produced documentation of the 60-day notice violations. The railroad has systematically intimidated, threatened, and destroyed the livelihoods of hardworking people. They claim to bring prosperity, but all we've seen is devastation. She yielded the floor to Tanner, who testified about the poisoned water supply. Then to Sarah, who presented evidence of the railroad's manipulation of local newspapers and government officials. Then to Caleb, who spoke quietly but firmly about the right of a man to keep what he'd built. And then it was Mara's turn. She approached the podium on shaking legs, looked out at the sea of faces, and saw Drummond in the front row, smiling like he'd already won. "My name is Mara Voss," she began. "Some of you know me from the newspapers. The auction bride. The desperate woman clinging to her husband's assets. That's the story the railroad wants you to believe, because if you think I'm acting out of greed, you won't listen to what I'm actually saying." She paused, gathering courage. "The truth is, I was sold at an auction because my father couldn't pay his debts. The truth is, I had nothing and no one when Caleb Voss paid for me. The truth is, I know what it's like to be treated as property, to have powerful men decide your worth. And that's exactly what the railroad is doing to these families. They've decided our land, our homes, our lives are worth whatever they want to pay. They've decided the law doesn't apply to them. They've decided they can destroy what we've built because they have money and influence and we don't." Her voice grew stronger. "But here's what they didn't count on. They didn't count on people fighting back. They didn't count on communities coming together. They didn't count on someone like me, someone they dismissed as worthless, standing up here and calling them out for what they really are. Bullies, criminals, people who hide behind words like progress and development while they burn barns and poison water and destroy lives." The room was dead silent. "So I'm asking you," Mara continued, looking at the assembly members, "don't let them hide anymore. Don't let them call destruction progress. Hold them accountable. Make them follow the law they claim to respect. Because if you don't, if you let them get away with this, you're telling every person in this territory that power is all that matters. That if you're rich enough, connected enough, you can do whatever you want to whoever you want. Is that really the future you want to build?" She stepped away from the podium. The silence held for 3 long seconds. Then someone started clapping. It was one of the reporters. Then another joined. Then a woman in the crowd. Then more, until half the room was applauding and the other half sat frozen, uncertain how to react. Mara made it back to her seat. Caleb grabbed her hand and held on tight. The assembly chairman called for order. "We'll take a 30-minute recess while the committee deliberates." Those 30 minutes felt like hours. Mara and the others waited outside, unable to speak, barely able to breathe. Finally, they were called back in. The chairman stood at the podium, looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. "After reviewing the testimony and evidence presented, this assembly has reached a decision. The railroad's expansion plans are hereby suspended pending a full investigation into allegations of intimidation, property damage, and violation of right-of-way grant terms. Additionally, we're ordering an independent audit of all compensation offers to ensure compliance with fair market value requirements. Until this investigation concludes, no further property seizures will be permitted. The homesteaders erupted in cheers. Drummond shot to his feet, face red, shouting objections that got lost in the noise. Mara sagged against Caleb, relief washing over her in waves. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "You did it," he corrected. "That speech, that's what changed everything." Outside, reporters swarmed them, asking questions, taking notes. Mara answered as best she could, trying to stay focused while her brain kept screaming that they'd won. They'd actually won. One reporter, a sharp-eyed woman from an Eastern paper, pulled Mara aside. "Mrs. Voss, your story is remarkable. Would you be willing to do a longer interview?" "I think there's a much bigger piece here about women's rights, property law, corporate overreach." Mara looked at Caleb, who nodded. "Yes, I'd be willing." The interview ran in 3 major newspapers the following week. It painted Mara not as the desperate auction bride, but as a fighter, an advocate, a woman who'd turned her worst moment into a platform for change. Letters started arriving at the cabin, some supportive, some hateful, all proof that people were paying attention. "You're famous," Sarah said, visiting with an armful of mail. "People are talking about you from here to California." "I don't want to be famous. I just want to keep my home." "Too late for that. You're a symbol now, like it or not." Mara didn't like it. She didn't like the attention, the scrutiny, the way strangers felt entitled to her story. But she couldn't deny it was working. The investigation into the railroad was proceeding. More families were coming forward with testimony. The pressure was building. And then, 3 weeks after the assembly meeting, everything fell apart. Mara was in town picking up supplies when she heard the shouting. She followed the sound to the marshal's office, where a crowd had gathered. "What's happening?" she asked a woman on the edge of the crowd. "Arrest warrant. For your husband." Mara's blood went cold. She pushed through the crowd, found the marshal standing on the steps with a paper in his hand. "What is this?" she demanded. The marshal looked uncomfortable. "Warrant for Caleb Voss. Assault charges filed by Marcus Drummond." "Assault? When?" "According to the complaint, Mr. Voss assaulted Mr. Drummond outside the assembly hall 3 weeks ago. Witnesses say he threatened him, made physical contact." Mara's mind raced. Caleb had confronted Drummond after the hearing, yes. They'd had words. But assault? That's a lie. "I was there. Caleb didn't touch him." "Well, Mr. Drummond has 3 witnesses who say otherwise, all upstanding citizens." The marshal wouldn't meet her eyes. "I don't have a choice here, Mrs. Voss. Warrant's been issued. Your husband needs to turn himself in." "This is revenge. The railroad's retaliating because we won. That's for the courts to decide. Where's your husband now?" Mara's hands clenched. "At home, but he's not coming in on false charges." "Then I'll have to come get him, and that'll make things worse for everyone." She rode home faster than was safe, the horse laboring under the pace. Caleb was at the woodpile when she arrived. He took one look at her face and set down the axe. "What happened?" She told him. Watched his expression go from confusion to anger to grim acceptance. "It's a setup," he said. "I know, but if you don't turn yourself in, they'll come for you. And if they do that, it gives them an excuse to use force. Make me look violent, dangerous." Caleb ran a hand through his hair. "Smart. Can't beat us legally, so they manufacture criminal charges. We'll fight it. Get Brennan." "Brennan's 3 days away. And even if he comes, this goes to trial. It's my word against Drummond's witnesses. Who do you think a jury will believe? The railroad executive or the mountain man with a reputation for violence?" "You don't have a reputation for violence." "I do now. That's the point." He looked at her. "They're trying to take away everything we built. Our credibility, our support, our freedom, and there's not a damn thing I can do to stop it." Mara grabbed his face, forced him to look at her. "There's one thing. We tell the truth. We fight this the same way we fought everything else, with evidence and testimony, and by refusing to back down. And if that doesn't work, then we adapt. But we don't give up. Not now. Not after everything." Caleb leaned his forehead against hers. "I'm scared, Mara. For the first time since I found you, I'm really scared." "Good. That means you're smart." She kissed him. "Now let's go turn you in before they can make this worse." They rode into town together. The marshal looked relieved when they showed up voluntarily. Thank you for cooperating, he said, genuinely grateful. Makes this easier for everyone. Just doing what's right, Mara said coldly, even when others won't. They locked Caleb in a cell while they processed the paperwork. Mara sat on a bench in the marshal's office, watching through the barred window as her husband paced the small space like a caged animal. How long until trial, she asked. Judge is setting the schedule now. Probably 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 14 days of Caleb locked up while the railroad's lawyers prepared their case. 14 days for public opinion to turn against them again. 14 days for everything they'd built to crumble. Mara left the marshal's office as the sun was setting. She needed to send word to Brennan, to Eleanor, to everyone who'd stood with them. But first she needed to go home, to the empty cabin that felt wrong without Caleb in it. She was untying her horse when she heard footsteps behind her. Mrs. Voss? She turned. Marcus Drummond stood in the alley beside the marshal's office, perfectly groomed as always, smile sharp as broken glass. What do you want? Mara asked. Just wanted to see how you're holding up. Terrible thing having your husband arrested. His tone was all fake sympathy. Must be hard for you. Get to the point, Drummond. The point is, this can all go away. Drop your testimony. Convince the others to back off the investigation. Do that, and I'll drop the charges against your husband. Mara stared at him. You want me to let you get away with everything you've done in exchange for dropping false charges you made up? I want you to be reasonable. Your husband goes to trial. He'll lose. My witnesses are credible. His reputation isn't. He'll do time. Maybe a year, maybe more. And while he's locked up, where does that leave you? Alone in that cabin with winter coming? How long before you lose everything? I've lost everything before. I survived. But now you have something to lose. That's different, isn't it? That's scarier. Drummond stepped closer. I'm giving you an out, Mrs. Voss. Take it. Withdraw from the fight. Let progress move forward, and you can have your husband back. Every word out of his mouth made Mara's skin crawl. But underneath the revulsion was calculation. He was offering a trade, silence for freedom. And he was right about one thing. Caleb in prison would destroy them, financially and emotionally, but giving up would destroy something else. The hope they'd given to every family fighting the railroad. The precedent they'd set. The proof that standing up mattered. No, Mara said. Drummond's smile faded. Excuse me? No. I won't drop my testimony. I won't convince anyone to back off. And you can take your threats and your false charges and choke on them. She stepped toward him, saw him flinch. You think you can scare me? You think losing my husband is the worst thing that could happen? I've been sold, dismissed, mocked, and told I'm worthless. I've survived things you couldn't imagine, and every time someone tried to break me, I got back up stronger, so go ahead. Put Caleb on trial. Lock him up if you can. But I promise you this, I will not stop fighting, I will not be quiet, and I will make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. Drummond's face went red. You're making a mistake. No, you did, when you decided I was weak enough to break. Mara turned away, mounted her horse. See you at the trial. She rode away without looking back, but she could feel his eyes on her the whole way. The cabin felt like a tomb without Caleb in it. Mara spent the first night sitting at the table with a shotgun across her lap, jumping at every sound, half expecting hired thugs to come finish what Drummond started. But morning came quiet and cold, and she was still alone. She rode to Eleanor's at first light, found the older woman already up, feeding chickens in the yard. Heard about Caleb, Eleanor said before Mara could speak. Whole valley's heard by now. Drummond offered me a deal. Drop the testimony, back off the investigation, and he drops the charges. Eleanor scattered feed, watching the chickens scramble. What'd you tell him? No? Good. Because if you'd said yes, I'd have lost all respect for you. Eleanor dusted off her hands. What do you need? Help. Brennan's on his way, but the trial's in 12 days. We need to find proof those witnesses are lying. Need to show this whole thing is fabricated. That's a tall order. I know. But if we don't, Caleb goes to prison, and everything we fought for dies with him. Mara's voice cracked. I can't let that happen. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. All right, Lynn and I will dig into Drummond's witnesses. See who they are, what connections they have to the railroad. Sarah can help. She knows how to find records, gossip, dirt people want buried. You focus on Caleb's defense. Make sure Brennan has everything he needs. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This might not work. These people are professionals at covering their tracks. Then we'll uncover them. Mara mounted her horse. Whatever it takes. Brennan arrived 2 days later, looking exhausted from the hard ride. Mara met him at his makeshift office above the general store and laid out everything, the timeline, Drummond's witnesses, the offer he'd made. He's desperate, Brennan said, reading through the arrest warrant. Means we're winning. They wouldn't manufacture charges if they had any other play. Desperate people are dangerous. True, but they also make mistakes. He tapped the witness list. These 3 men. Do we know anything about them? Not yet. Eleanor's investigating. Good. We need to break their stories, find inconsistencies, connections to the railroad, anything that shows they're being paid to lie. Brennan leaned back. And we need Caleb to testify. I know it's risky, but if he doesn't take the stand, the jury only hears Drummond's version. While Mara visited Caleb that afternoon, the marshal allowed them 30 minutes in the cell, door locked behind her. Caleb looked thinner already, face drawn. He stood when she entered, and they met in the middle of the small space, holding on to each other like drowning people. How are you? Mara asked against his chest. Been better? You? Scared? Angry? Determined? He pulled back enough to see her face. Drummond make you an offer? How'd you know? Because that's what men like him do. Try to buy what they can't take. What'd you tell him? What do you think? A ghost of a smile crossed his face. That's my girl. The smile faded. But Mara, if this goes bad, it won't. If it does, I need you to promise me something. Don't waste your life trying to get me out. Take the money I saved, take the land if you can keep it, and build something. Live. Don't let this destroy you. Mara grabbed his face, forced him to look at her. Stop talking like you've already lost. We haven't even fought yet. I know the odds. The odds said I'd die worthless and alone. The odds said we'd lose our land. The odds have been against us from the start, and we're still here. She kissed him hard. So have a little faith in your wife. I'm not done fighting for you. He held her until the marshal knocked. Time up. Mara left the cell feeling more resolved than when she'd entered. 3 days before the trial, Eleanor and Sarah showed up at the cabin with news. We found something, Sarah said, spreading papers across the table. Drummond's witnesses. All 3 of them work for companies with financial ties to the railroad. One's a surveyor they hired last year. Another owns a freight business that contracts exclusively with Mountain Pacific. The third is Clayton Pierce's cousin. Mara's head snapped up. Pierce? The same Pierce who organized the auction? The very same. Turns out the Pierce family has been in the railroad's pocket for years. Clayton's financing came from Mountain Pacific investors. So all 3 witnesses have direct financial incentive to lie, Mara said slowly. That's not coincidence. No, that's conspiracy. Eleanor's smile was sharp. And we have documentation proving it. Business records, contracts, bank transfers, everything Brennan needs to rip their credibility apart. Did you show him yet? Waiting for you. Thought you'd want to be there when we did. They rode to town together, 3 women with evidence that could change everything. Brennan's reaction when he saw the papers was worth the journey. This is exactly what we need, he said, flipping through pages. I can use this to impeach their testimony, show bias, prove they're being compensated to lie. The question is whether the judge will allow it. Why wouldn't he? Mara asked. Because it makes the railroad look bad, and judges don't always appreciate that kind of scandal in their courtrooms. Brennan gathered the papers. But it's worth trying. Worst case, we still have it for public opinion. The trial started on a Tuesday morning with storm clouds gathering overhead. The courtroom was packed again. Settlers on one side, railroad men on the other, reporters filling every available space. Caleb sat at the defense table in clothes that didn't quite fit, borrowed from someone half his size. But he held himself straight, met Drummond's eyes across the room without flinching. Judge Morrison entered, and Mara felt her stomach clench. Everything came down to this. The prosecution went first. Ashford, the railroad's lawyer from before, presented the case methodically. On the evening of the assembly meeting, Caleb Voss had confronted Marcus Drummond in the street. There had been an altercation. Threats were made, physical contact occurred. "We have 3 credible witnesses who will testify to these facts," Ashford said. "This is not a complex case. It's assault, plain and simple. And no matter how sympathetic the defendant's circumstances, the law is clear." He called his first witness, James Cooper, the surveyor. Cooper took the stand, sworn in, and told his story. He'd been walking past the assembly hall when he heard shouting, saw Caleb grab Drummond by the coat, shove him against a wall, threaten him. "What exactly did Mr. Voss say?" Ashford asked. "He said, 'I'll kill you if you come near my land again.'" Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Mara's hands clenched in her lap. Brennan stood for cross-examination. "Mr. Cooper, you work as a surveyor, correct?" "Yes." "And who employs you?" "I'm independent, work for whoever hires me." "Including Mountain Pacific Railway?" Cooper hesitated. "Sometimes." "How many jobs have you done for them in the past year?" "I don't keep exact count. Would 12 jobs be accurate?" Brennan produced a paper. "According to their employment records, you've been contracted by Mountain Pacific 12 times in the past year."
That's more than any other client, isn't it?
"I suppose."
"And you're currently under contract with them for survey work along the Northern Pass, the same area where Mr. Voss's land is located." "That's just coincidence." "Is it? Or is it convenient that you happen to witness an assault by the man standing in the way of your employer's expansion plans?" "Objection," Ashford called. "Speculation." "Sustained," Morrison said. "Watch it, Mr. Brennan." But the damage was done.
Mara saw doubt flicker across a few jurors' faces. The second witness was worse. Thomas Whitmore, the freight contractor, told an even more damning story. Not only had he witnessed the assault, he'd heard Caleb threaten Drummond's life multiple times. But Brennan was ready. "Mr. Whitmore, your freight company, Whitmore Transport, contracts exclusively with Mountain Pacific, correct?"
"We work with them, yes."
"According to these financial records, 97% of your business comes from the railroad. If they canceled their contract, you'd be bankrupt within months, wouldn't you?" Whitmore's jaw tightened. "I provide good service. They're happy with my work." "I'm sure they are, especially when you provide testimony that helps their legal cases."
"I'm telling the truth. Are you? Or are you protecting your business interests?" The third witness, Pierce's cousin Edward, started sweating before he even took the stand. And when Brennan revealed the family connection to Clayton Pierce and the financial ties to the railroad, his testimony collapsed completely. "So let me understand," Brennan said. "Your cousin Clayton Pierce organized the auction where Mrs. Voss was sold, an auction that's been discussed extensively in connection with this case. And you expect this jury to believe you have no bias against the defendant?" "I'm just saying what I saw." "You're saying what you were told to say, what you were paid to say." "That's a lie." "Is it? Because I have bank records showing a deposit of $500 into your account 3 days after you agreed to testify. Care to explain where that money came from?" Edward's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Brennan turned to the jury. No further questions. By the time the prosecution rested, their case was in tatters. But Mara knew it wasn't over. Reasonable doubt wasn't the same as innocence. Brennan called Caleb to the stand. Caleb looked uncomfortable under the scrutiny, but his voice stayed steady as he told his version. Yes, he'd confronted Drummond. Yes, there had been words, but no threats, no violence. "I told him I wouldn't let him take my land without a fight," Caleb said. "That's not a threat. That's a fact. I'll use every legal means I have to protect what's mine, but I didn't threaten his life, didn't touch him beyond standing close while we talked." "Why do you think these witnesses claim otherwise?" Brennan asked. "Because they're being paid to. Because destroying my credibility serves the railroad's interests. Because if I'm in prison, I can't fight them." Ashford's cross-examination was brutal. He hammered at Caleb's past, his isolation, his violent appearance, tried to paint him as unstable, dangerous, exactly the kind of man who'd make threats. But Caleb didn't break, didn't lose his temper, just answered each question calmly, firmly, truthfully. Then Brennan called Mara. She took the stand on shaking legs, swore to tell the truth,
and met Caleb's eyes across the courtroom. Mrs. Voss, you were present during the confrontation between your husband and Mr. Drummond, correct? Yes. What did you observe? My husband approached Mr. Drummond. They exchanged words. It got heated, but there was no violence, no threats, just two men disagreeing strongly. Did Mr. Voss grab Mr. Drummond? No. Did he threaten to kill him? Absolutely not. Ashford stood for cross-examination with that predatory smile. Mrs. Voss, you love your husband, don't you? Yes. And you'd do anything to protect him? I'd do anything legal to protect him, but I wouldn't lie under oath. Wouldn't you? Your entire life changed when you married Mr. Voss. You went from having nothing to having a home, security, a future. If he goes to prison, you lose all of that. Seems like strong motivation to lie. Mara's hands gripped the railing. I don't need to lie because I'm telling the truth. But you're right about one thing. Caleb gave me a life when no one else would. He saw value in me when the entire world said I was worthless. And that's exactly why I know he wouldn't threaten anyone's life. He respects life. He saved mine. That's a nice story, Mrs. Voss. But this jury needs facts, not sentiment. Then here's a fact. Your client, Marcus Drummond, offered me a deal. Drop my testimony against the railroad and he'd drop charges against my husband. That's witness tampering. That's obstruction of justice. And that tells me these charges were never about assault. They're about silencing opposition. The courtroom erupted. Morrison's gavel came down hard. Mrs. Voss, that's a serious accusation, the judge said. Do you have proof? I have my word, and unlike the prosecution's witnesses, I don't have a financial incentive to lie. Ashford tried to recover, but it was too late. Mara had turned defense into offense, and the jury was paying attention. Closing arguments came next. Ashford painted Caleb as a violent man using legal tricks to avoid consequences. Brennan painted the railroad as a corrupt entity manufacturing charges to silence dissent. Look at the evidence, Brennan said, addressing the jury directly. 3 witnesses, all with financial ties to the railroad. Convenient timing right after the assembly hearing. An offer to drop charges in exchange for silence. This isn't about assault. This is about power. The railroad thought they could intimidate Mr. Voss into submission. When that didn't work, they tried to imprison him. Don't let them get away with it. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Mara spent every minute of it pacing the courthouse steps, unable to eat, unable to think about anything except Caleb locked in that cell. Finally, they were called back. The foreman stood. We, the jury, find the defendant, Caleb Voss, not guilty. The courtroom exploded. Mara felt her knees buckle. Eleanor caught her, held her up while the world spun. Not guilty. Free. Alive. Caleb emerged from the holding cell looking dazed. Mara ran to him, and he caught her, lifted her off her feet, buried his face in her hair. It's over, he said. We won. We won, she repeated, and started crying. But even in victory, Mara knew it wasn't really over. The railroad was still there. The investigation was ongoing. The fight would continue. Just not today. Today was for celebration. The homesteaders threw an impromptu party at Eleanor's rebuilt barn. Someone brought a fiddle. Someone else brought whiskey. They danced and ate and told stories late into the night. Mara stood at the edge of it all, watching Caleb laugh with James Halstead, watching Lynn dance with Sarah, watching people who'd been strangers a year ago become family. You did this, a voice said beside her. She turned. Jacob Tanner stood there, Lily at his side. We all did it, Mara said. No, you started it. You were the one who found the legal angle, organized the resistance, stood up at that assembly. Everyone else followed your lead. Tanner extended his hand. Thank you for showing us it was possible to fight back. Mara shook his hand, then pulled Lily into a hug. I'm glad you came. Wouldn't miss it. Besides, someone needs to keep you humble. Lily smiled. Can't have you getting too big for your boots now that you're a folk hero. I'm not you are. Accept it. Lily squeezed her hand. And use it. People listen to you now. Make it count. Make it count. The word stayed with Mara long after the party ended, after she and Caleb rode home under stars that felt close enough to touch.
The investigation into the railroad took 3 more months. During that time, more evidence surfaced: bribes to local officials, falsified property assessments, environmental damage from unauthorized construction. The Territorial Assembly voted to revoke Mountain Pacific's right-of-way grant and levy substantial fines. Drummond disappeared before charges could be filed. Word was he'd fled east, back to investors who were none too happy about the scandal. The valley started to heal, barns were rebuilt, families who'd sold under pressure bought back their land or found new plots. A sense of cautious optimism took root, and Mara found herself with a new role she never expected. It started with a letter from a woman in the Southern Territory. Her husband had died, leaving her with land and debt. A development company was trying to force her to sell. Could Mara help? Then another letter, then 3 more, then a dozen. "You're becoming an advocate," Sarah said, helping Mara sort through the mail. "Whether you plan to or not." "I don't know the first thing about being an advocate." "You know how to fight, how to organize, how to make powerful people answer for their actions. That's more than most advocates have." Sarah pulled out a letter. "This one's from a women's rights group in Denver. They want you to speak at their conference." "I can't go to Denver. I have work here." "Mara." Sarah set the letter down. "You have something rare, a story people care about, a voice they'll listen to. You can use that to help people, or you can hide from it. Your choice." Mara looked at Caleb, who was fixing a window frame. "What do you think?" He set down his tools. "I think you're the woman who stood up in a courtroom and called out corruption in front of everyone. I think you're the woman who organized a valley full of scared homesteaders into a fighting force. I think if anyone can help people who are powerless, it's you." "But what about the cabin, the land, us?" "I'll be here. The land will be here. And when you come back, we'll still be us." He crossed to her, pulled her close. "I didn't marry you to keep you small, Mara. I married you to give you room to grow, so grow." She went to Denver, spoke at the conference, helped 3 families fight unfair land seizures, wrote articles for newspapers about property rights and corporate overreach. She came home to Caleb every time, to the cabin that had become a symbol of resistance, to the valley that had become a community. 2 years after the trial, they broke ground on a new building in town, a legal aid office funded by donations from all over the territory. Eleanor cut the ribbon. Sarah would run it. And Mara would work there when she wasn't traveling, helping people who had nowhere else to turn. The night before the office opened, Mara stood on the cabin porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. "Thinking about the auction?" Caleb asked, joining her. "Yeah, how different everything is now." "You regret any of it?" "Not even a little." She leaned against him. "I was so angry that night, so sure my life was over. Turns out it was just beginning." "Mine too." He wrapped his arms around her. "You know what I remember most about that night? The way you stood against that wall with your arms crossed, like you were daring the world to break you. And I thought, that's someone worth knowing, someone worth fighting for." "I wasn't worth anything." "You were worth everything. You just didn't know it yet." Mara turned in his arms, looked up at the scarred, steady man who'd changed her life by choosing her when no one else would. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me. For believing I was worth more than they said. For giving me room to become whoever I was supposed to be." "Thank you for the same." He kissed her forehead. "And for loving me even when I'm stubborn and difficult. Especially then." They stood on the porch as darkness fell, watching stars emerge one by one. Somewhere in the valley, families were sitting down to dinner in homes they'd fought to keep. Somewhere, a woman was reading one of Mara's articles and finding hope. Somewhere, progress was happening the right way, with respect, with fairness, with people mattering more than profit. The cabin behind them stood solid, a testament to everything they'd survived. The land stretched out in all directions, free and theirs. And the future was whatever they chose to make it. 5 years later, when Mara stood at another podium, this time as the territory's first female advocate to argue before the territorial Supreme Court, she thought about that frozen night in the saloon, about standing against a wall, worthless and unwanted, about the stranger who'd paid double her value and changed everything. She won that case too, went home to the cabin, to Caleb, to the life they'd built from nothing but determination and stubborn hope.
And when people asked her how she'd done it, how she'd gone from auction victim to legal advocate, she told them the truth. I had help. I had people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. I had a man who saw value where others saw none. And I had a choice: give up or fight back. I chose to fight, and I kept choosing it every single day until fighting became who I was. The woman no one wanted had become the one no one could replace, and the man who'd chosen her when everyone laughed became her partner in every fight that mattered. They'd won their land, their freedom, their right to exist on their own terms. But more than that, they'd won each other. And that, Mara knew, standing in their cabin on a winter evening with snow falling soft outside and Caleb's arms around her, was the only victory that ever really mattered.